2022 budget preview presentation on a safe and healthy city. It's Monday, January 27th, and I'd like to remind everybody we have a copy of the Open Meetings Act posted at the back of the hearing room. And I'd like to say welcome, and Jennifer, I think you're going to give us an introduction and overview.
Yes, I will be brief. Madam Chair, members of the City Council, thanks for having us here today. We've structured these presentations to the City Council as previews to our 2020-2022 budget with 5 different categories, and today we're going to talk about how we maintain and create a safe and healthy city. We know that Lincoln is committed to a safe and healthy environment for residents so that residents are freed from worrying about the basics of city living and they can rely on prompt and effective public service when it is most needed. And so today we're going to go over some key performance indicators that our departments in each of these areas use as they try to determine whether they need to make improvements, whether we should be considering different budget adjustments as we try to achieve the goals and outcomes that we want to for our residents. I'm probably not going to take the 5 minutes for each of these as we start, but you'd have 2 handouts. One is an agenda that gives you an idea of the topics that we're going to cover today. And as I mentioned, we would like to ask for you to enter executive session for our talk about technology security. And then you do have another handout, which are the safe and healthy city performance indicators that we're using as we prepare the budget. Seasoned council members will be familiar with the use of goals and outcomes and performance indicators that the city has been creating and using for the last several years. We think that using data-driven evidence to make decisions about how we prioritize budget dollars for policies and programs is important. And so we have worked with our city directors over the course of the last 5 months to review the indicators that were in place and that you have seen prior to today and in your former service. And make sure that they are the indicators that we would lift up as important going forward. So I think what you will see if you've been through kind of the taking charge or the link stat process in the past, that we've probably eliminated a few, we've tried to condense some, and then we've lifted up a couple of new priorities there as well. And we've done that, again, in conjunction with our departments. And we see that as an ongoing process. It is a fluid process and something that as we get better in some areas, then we will lift up others. And so we always need to be adjusting to the different circumstances that we deal with on a daily basis. So I give you these key performance indicators. Our departments are working on updating the website, and by the time the mayor presents to you her recommended budget in June, all of that will be available and transparent on the city website so that our public will also know what kinds of goals we have in terms of the performance of our departments. So with that, I don't need to talk anymore. I will introduce Chief Bleimeister and Pat Bohr from Lincoln Fire are going to talk to you a little bit about our public safety indicators. And I would also just lift up very quickly that you will see a lot of health indicators, and we didn't lift up any of those health department indicators today based on the time we had available, but you can expect additional information and memos about some of the topics that they're trying to address in the health department as we move forward. So I'll leave it to you.
Sure.
Thank you. And I think you're all set here if you just...
Great.
Good afternoon, members of the council. Appreciate your time. And we will start with slides that many of you have seen that have been part of our annual statistical presentation. And one of the measures that we feel is most important, especially to the perception of safety and security within our community, and that is violent crime. As you can see, we really like to look at trend lines and 10-year trend lines, and we continue to meet the benchmark that has been established by holding the violent crime rate to 25% or below the average of cities within 50,000 of our population base. What is violent crime? There's 4 things: murder, robbery, sexual assault, aggravated assault. Aggravated assault is not a fist fight. It is a shooting with injury. It is a stabbing. It is an assault that causes serious bodily injury. How many of these particular incidents do we work on average in our community? Roughly 1,000. As you can see, slight uptick in the rate of violent crime in 2019, and this is something that we've spoken about and continue to watch. There's really one statistical category that is driving that, and that is sexual assault. A 14.1% increase in the reports of sexual assault in 2019. 14.1% increase in sexual assaults in 2019. Then we have to ask why. And our crime analysis unit has done an outstanding job of looking at a host of factors that is driving this. One continues to be the reclassification of the redefinition of sexual assault that occurred in June of 2016. And so it expanded, it broadened the definition, which is going to increase these numbers. Two is the Me Too movement. 100% we can measure based upon the number of belated sexual assault reports, those that are increasing violent crime. We think that the reporting, this increased reporting is a good thing, because historically, sexual assault is an underreported crime. Most estimates put it at about 33% of the actual incidents are reported to law enforcement. What are we doing to address this? Which I think is the most important question, is that we have recently made application to with the Family Violence Council through Sarah Hoyle and Bob Moyer for a full-time sexual assault investigator. So it's a grant application. And with that is also a victim advocate specifically dedicated to the continuum of care. Sexual assault is not something that we do a good job of investigating and thoroughly following up on these reports. But there's so many other facets to it that are of equal or even more importance, and that is hopefully this reporting starts a process where individuals can begin a healing, going back to some semblance of normalcy. So violent crime in essence is static in our community, something that we watch every day, and something that we'll continue to address as we go forward. Response times. Response times are very important to both us, and I know that Chief Borer is going to speak about that for LFR. And our goal is to maintain a response time to priority 1 and 2 calls, basically crimes in progress, where we arrive in 10 minutes or less 80% of the time. And this particular response time matrix is this. From when an individual in our community dials 911, that call's received, to the time an officer arrives. These are not the 125,000 calls that the Lincoln Police Department are responding to on an annual basis. These are ones where our presence can stabilize a particular event. And as you can see, we're slightly above this year the benchmark. And there are several things that internally we continue to do to try to address that. So being above it is good, right? Because that means we're arriving in 10 minutes or less 84% of the time. But the boundary review that was done by members of our department and by members of the community in 2018, that is indicated in here. We're going to watch how does the opening of 6601 Pine Lake and Pine Lake Road now positively impact these. And there's a whole host of different factors. We look at this every single year, every single month, really, by the team level. It's important to the service that we provide, and it's important that we continue to meet those expectations. Safety and Healthy City. Since the early 1990s, we have been asking the same set of questions to citizens about how safe and secure do you feel in your neighborhood. And it is very, very important to us about the perception of services provided not only by the Lincoln Police Department, but by city government and all of our partners. Because once again, the Lincoln Police Department is a small part of the overall perception of safety in our community. We're proud of these numbers because the polling for this comes from individuals that have been involved in a traffic accident, have received a citation, or have been the victim of a crime. So these are individuals that often are dealing with us on a tough day. And we want to watch this and make sure that we continue to provide this high quality of service. When you look at things with the perception of crime in a community and the overall crime rates, oftentimes you would think, right, as the crime rate goes down, the perception should go up. And that's what's happening in Lincoln, but that is not what's happening in agencies across the country. Okay, here is a very new addition to the LinkStat process. So LinkStat 2.0 is police officer committed time, and I'm going to do my best to try to explain this. And this is something that we talk about, look at. There is an algorithm in place that basically takes into account how much time off does an officer have, how many reports is an officer completing, how many follow-up minutes, the time it takes from when they're taking a call for service to when they're completing that investigation. All of these and more are incorporated into the committed time. That is where officers on the street have no ability to do anything else except respond to issues. So it's completely responsive. And we want to be proactive. You can see here on this chart for the first time in 2019, and we can't look at 1 year. We have to look at trend lines, so we want to continue to monitor this. Once the committed time goes over 60%, there is evidence-based practices called the Rule of 60 that I can certainly get you more information on that says that is a tipping point. Because once there is more than 60% of an officer's committed time, you're losing proactive time. What is proactive? I think that the next slide does the best job of trying to explain that. These are the things that are important to building legitimacy and trust and to being preventative, which is what we're striving for. Building all the different community events that our officers are attending is uncommitted time. Improving the trust, it builds on their willingness to cooperate, which again is something that distinguishes Lincoln from many other communities. No matter whom is involved, the majority of individuals in Lincoln are still committed to assisting us with that particular process, even if it's against one of their family members or that there is an inherent distrust of the law enforcement profession. So we really, really want to watch close that committed time in order to best address things that are going forward in our communities. And I think that it's part of the culture of the Lincoln Police Department. I think it's one of the great things that our men and women do on the street, and several of them are represented in here today, is they're taking the time out to not only be responsive to their calls for service, but to look for every opportunity to build those relationships in advance of tragedy. And last, one of the things that we felt is very important to bring forward as a discussion item, we've talked about all of the different technology projects that exist, right? And we have been blessed to have the community or the radio system that is now in place. Another key part of the radio system in our overall communication process is computer-aided dispatch. We talked earlier about when someone calls in, immediately the call taker begins typing in the computer-aided dispatch program what is going on. And basically what they're trying to do is use great listening techniques to try to summarize what can oftentimes be a very frantic situation, whether it's for law enforcement or whether it's for fire. And then they're sending that information electronically via CAD to a dispatcher. And that same information is also being forwarded to the officers on the streets on their mobile data terminals. And our computer-aided dispatch technology, the software, is antiquated. And we are not utilizing all of the functions that exist within those technology projects today. One of the biggest ones is the mapping functions that provides the officer with a, hey, here's the best route to get to this particular location, and closest unit identification. That's especially important for fire, and it is important to us too, automatic vehicle location, if that makes sense. So we believe that there is an opportunity here to improve response times with technology, both for police and fire. And the best part of this is that the funding exists without new taxpayer dollars. And I love coming in front of you and talking about things like the garage that don't require new taxpayer dollars. Where does that money potentially come from? And again, this is a discussion that we want all of your input on, and we have been getting from the mayor's office, is that there are going to be, with the completion of the construction projects for the Joint Police Fire Station and with fire, and with the finalized completion of the radio system implementation, some dollars left in the quarter-cent public safety sales tax, right? We brought that to the attention of the Public Safety Oversight Committee in August of 2019. And one of their recommendations that they asked myself and Chief Despain to do is to go forward to the mayor saying, we believe a portion of whatever dollars are left over should be dedicated to this improved communication technology project. Included with that is Michelle Salvage is in here. She's one of our talented employees at the Lincoln Police Department, Captain Mady McGuire, Eric Jones, and Eric Jones is with LFR. So many others have been working with the Public Safety Commission, Public Service Commission, which is a state entity, to provide additional offset funding for this. And that's how we believe that we can upgrade this technology without new taxpayer dollars. I know there'll be questions. I hope there'll be questions. I'm going to turn it over to Pat.
You want to switch seats, or you want to?
I can run it for you if you
Okay,
like.
yeah, that works. Yeah, works for me. Good afternoon. All right. Go to the first slide. Thank you. This first slide talks about our one of our performance measures, being able to confine fires to the room of origin 80% of the time. This doesn't tell you how well we are doing, but it tells you why we measure it. What this slide indicates is that if we can confine the fire to the room of origin 3% or a very small percentage of the time, the risk of injury to either us or the citizen is very small, 3% or less. If the fire gets outside the room of origin, the chance of injury to that occupant or to a firefighter goes dramatically upward, in the neighborhood of 83%. So this doesn't tell you how well we do it, it just tells you why we measure it and why it's important to the community. The next slide, well, before we go there are tons of reasons, tons of other reasons why we want to measure keeping the fire to the room of origin. We could talk about risk to firefighter safety, we could talk about ISO, we could talk about economic impact, we could talk about property values, a number of things like that. But this is one of the most important ones we feel because it directly relates to our community members. So now we can go to the next one. This one tells you how well we are at performing keeping the fire to the room of origin 80% of the time. You can see the red line is our benchmark goal, and we are just under that at 78.4%. A couple of things that you don't see here is that it's a very small data set, so one incident can have a large impact on where that bar sits. Matter of fact, we're looking at a data set of less than 100 points of data, and so it's a very small data set. The other thing you don't see here is that we had 0 fire fatalities last year, and that's huge for us, and so we think that's a huge shout out for us, for our folks. We had about 20 injuries during those right around 100 calls, and we rescued 6 pets. So the other thing that you don't see here is the contribution of Station 15. It was open late in the year, and so we didn't have the response out of that station to get to the locations quickly to help impact this particular data set. If we'd had Station 15 open longer in the year, we might have seen an improvement in getting to the fire quickly and keeping the fire to the room of origin. What this does reflect is a growing city. We know how annually how much the city grows, and the more it grows, if we have a static number of resources, it's going to be difficult to hit that bar of 80%, keeping the fire in the room of origin that amount of time. So that's that particular graph. The next one, this one shows our performance related to the ambulance response ordinance. The ordinance is responding 90% of the time in 8 minutes or less. You can see the bar graph. In 2018, we stood up another units. Prior to that time, we had 6 ambulances full-time. In 2018, we stood up another full-time unit, so we have 7 ambulances now that are staffed full-time. The downtick in 2019, again, a growing community with a stagnant number of resources. An EMS call volume grows at a pace greater than the population growth. EMS calls go up about 3% a year. So again, with a stagnant number of resources, you're probably going to see a little bit decline in performance unless we can get AVL, because AVL is going to help us immensely, as the chief indicated, sending the right unit to the right location in a quicker time frame. So we're kind of excited about getting AVL and seeing what kind of results it will produce in the area of response. So that's this particular slide. The next one we have is it shows you how much property was saved and lost to fire. The blue bars are what was lost, and the green bars are what we saved. You can look at it like an insurance policy. There are a number of ways of doing that, looking at it. What this graph does not show you is does not show you the economic impact of saving a business. We save a business, we don't lose the economic power that business generates. We don't lose property value. We don't see people out of work, because when we save a business, that's the benefit of all those things. And so, again, what you're seeing here, without digging deep into it, is the amount of property lost versus what we save. And there are lots of other value points when you talk about all those other aspects of saving property. Okay. The next one is our cardiac survival rate. We brag about this a lot. In 2016, we feel like we were the best in the nation, surpassing everybody else. We get this information from CARES. It's a third-party agency that gathers this data, keeps it. They establish their criteria on how you measure a cardiac arrest save. That person's got to walk out of the hospital and all those other things associated with it. So they measure the data and they give it to us. We haven't received that data from them for 2019 yet, and so we don't have a bar there for 2019. We're expecting that soon. Just anecdotally looking at our data, we think we had about 40 cardiac arrest saves, so we think we're going to be in the same range as we were in 2018. But again, a very small data set with only 40 cardiac arrests that fit into their criteria. One incident can change that bar graph significantly. So it's a very small data set. And then lastly, what you see here is the cost of the department per capita compared to others around us regionally. And I can get you that array of cities, if you will, that we are comparing ourselves to, places like Omaha or Kansas City, something like that. But this shows you the cost per capita versus what they're paying in their area for cost per capita. You might get the impression, because those numbers are going down, our budget doesn't go down. It's been going up. But when you look at a growing community and the population increase, it looks like it's going down, because per capita, as we increase in people, the cost to the number of people we have goes down. So that is the last one I have.
And with that, I believe that we would entertain any questions on these two presentations that you may have. And if we can more effectively try to put in your mind how the things that we just talked about equates into what we believe the needs will be within the 2021 and 21-22 budgetary process.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Benny?
Chief Ward, would you go back a few slides? You lost me a little bit on, back again, that one,
Okay? Property saved are the green bars,
okay?
and property lost, if we go to a,
Is it annual budget is the blue?
okay, a typo on the,
It's like your budget's staying the same, but you're saving more properties. Am I reading that wrong?
okay. You're right, maybe I misread it. So department expenditure, how much each person or people in the community are spending versus what we saved in the community. Good catch. I explained it incorrectly. So yeah, what you're seeing here is the blue is our annual budget, and the green is what we save in property value, save it from total destruction by fire each year.
I think that
So
says you're
good
doing a
catch.
great job.
I'm sorry
I
about
think
that.
that says you're doing a great job.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. But it doesn't address all those other factors that I mentioned, but thank you for that catch, I appreciate
Sorry.
that.
Any other questions? Richard?
You speak of the, what is it, AVL?
Automatic vehicle location.
How much or what's the cost of it?
So you're talking about CAD, right? CAD is the totality of,
Component of CAD.
yes, AVL is a component.
Component of the CAD system?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of factors that we're looking at and we've been working with those, with LFR, dispatch, with David Young and his staff now too, is that there is the added components, mapping and AVL is one for CAD. Two is the sustainability of the technology, because we have had periods of outages because the technology's getting old. And it's critical that CAD remain active and in service. So you're asking costs. I can tell you that we are in current negotiations for the upgrade, and that the cost, they're between the Public Service Commission and the quarter-cent sales tax dollars. There is money to cover that, and there will still be money left in the quarter-cent sales tax budget.
Is there ongoing subscription?
Previous
costs?
quarter-cent sales tax, yes, sir.
Ongoing subscription costs with these systems?
Absolutely, and they are greater than what they are today.
Yeah.
And that is, again, what we're still negotiating. We have to remember, too, that there's a whole host of city and county agencies that are going to contribute to that and ongoing,
Ask if
Yep.
there'd be more than just these two
it will be,
departments.
yes.
Maybe
The Sheriff's Office and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Police Department are two of the other,
Yeah, our CAD provides service to the whole county,
yep,
Part of the 911 system.
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Chief, could I follow up on that too? I know that there was a committee that usually reviews and makes recommendation of any of additional funding that might be available from the quarter-cent sales tax.
Yes.
Have they had a chance to review, particularly the unions have had a chance to review about taking some of that funding and applying it to the CAD ABL?
Great
software?
question. August 28th of 2019, myself and Chief Despain brought this same conversation forward to the Public Safety's Oversight Committee, and they made a recommendation that the dollars needed to pay for the CAD upgrade is the first thing that it's used on. And then we also believe, so we're getting closer and closer to the completion, and we're gonna know exactly what the dollar costs are of these construction projects. We're getting closer and closer and closer, thankfully, to the completion of the radio system implementation. So we're gonna know how much money is available. And yeah, I hate to forecast numbers in this public setting with Riley sitting right here.
Don't do it.
But once again, I can safely assure you, between those two funding streams, there will still be monies available for other considerations that have been brought forward mainly by fire.
Madam Chair, the other part of your question was the local unions. We've talked to our labor group about it. They recognize the importance of a new CAD and are supportive of spending this money on CAD.
Okay, thank you. That
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
okay. James?
I think.
Oh, Tammy?
I do. I had the same questions that Councilman McGinnis brought up for you, Chief. So, but your point made me wonder one more thing. With the firefighters union, have they indicated any similar requests to you yet, Pat?
Yes.
Okay, so we will have that chance to weigh all those requests
Yes.
as we go through this process. Once we know amounts, which we're not gonna
Yeah.
know today.
But again, we've talked about, in our discussions, we've talked about a lot of different things. They have lots of items on their list. But they recognize the importance of CAD, and it is on the top of their list
Great.
to use the extra money that was raised in the previous quarter-cent tax increase for CAD. So they're very supportive of that.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Councilman Bowers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I had some questions about some of the indicators in particular. For Chief Bleimmeister, wanted to have a response time of 10 minutes or less. I'm just kind of curious, how did the 10 minutes become the marker? I mean, is that like a national number or?
Yeah, it is one of the particular factors, James, that 10 minutes is something where we believe our presence on those kinds of calls, so crimes in progress, bank robberies, injury accidents, where our presence can stabilize an event. And so that's really where that 10-minute number is coming to. If we can get there within 10 minutes or less is best, correct? Mm-hmm. Then that promotes a stabilization and apprehension of whomever is committing said crime and prevention of further injury, especially in circumstances like injury accidents. And so I don't know that there's any national research that shows that 10-minute number. It's just been consistently used throughout the LinkStat process. When we look at, hey, what are some of the factors that improve response times, right? We talked about the boundary review. We talked about both full-service stations, 66 and Pine Lake, the new station in Northwest Team, or a substation at 14th and Adams Street. People added to the street teams are also going to improve those particular response times. Because if we're holding calls, and we hold calls, we try not to hold priority 1s and 2 calls. If it's holding, that time is just ticking.
Okay. Another question that I had is, you mentioned the murder, robbery, sexual assault, and aggravated assault as kind of being the 4. Is human trafficking underneath sexual assault?
Human trafficking is a subcomponent of sexual assault.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
I just wanted to get clarification on that. Another question that I had, in response to how it was counted for the 10-minute response time, and then also maintaining a 75% positive relationship with the community. I think the Northeast team does a great job. I think Captain Faringer is excellent at what he does. I really, really respect the Northeast police officers for keeping us safe. Just my question is there any way, are those broken down by districts, or is that citywide? I mean, I'm just kind of curious if that information's available.
Yes, it is. And if you're wanting a particular breakdown, we break it down by team?
We do a team.
Okay.
By race, by type of event.
Awesome.
So we can get you those numbers if you would like.
Awesome. And then sorry, I don't mean to keep going on. Another question that I have is the 60% or less for committed times. From what I understand, that's one of the reasons why Omaha is recruiting some of our officers, correct? Because in Omaha, they have less committed time.
Okay, so I want to make sure that this is important to me. Measuring committed time, the algorithm that goes into it is somewhat complex. Luke Bonkowitz, who is here today. Luke, stand up, raise your hand. Again, we're fortunate to have Luke. Let's not lose him to Omaha PD. One of the reasons that are cited to us in exit interviews is that Omaha officers are not as busy as Lincoln officers, especially the street teams. That's a perception, right? That's not the only reason that's being cited when people leave. The most prevalent one is that a spouse or significant other lives or works in Omaha and they're trying to improve their quality of life by reducing the commute time back and forth. But again, what is driving that increase in the committed time, video, our street teams, every single call for service, whether it's an accident, a hit and run accident, or a murder, they are canvassing for Ring doorbells and businesses that have video. And then we have to get that video, analyze that video, do a report on it. A second one is the added expectation of cell phone recovery and analysis, which is a key component to every single investigation. Some of those factors we believe are driving up that committed time. And we can affect that through policy change, but really we don't want to sacrifice the great service and the great work that's being done. And so a big component and a continuing need, we believe, is to incrementally grow the staffing of our agency.
Last question I have, and thank you so much. Pat, you said that you had the list of per capita costs for like different cities. I would love to have a copy of that.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I
we'll get
can
it for
share
you.
it with people. Thank you.
Good luck.
That was going to be my question too. What are the costs you're throwing in there
Okay.
in your calculations for
Okay.
cost per capita? Does it include like equipment? And-
I'll get that to you.
Okay,
Okay,
that's great.
yeah.
Richard, do you have another question?
One quick comment. There's one that sells the city of Lincoln to a lot of outside businesses. The public safety, the police department and the fire department are something we sell. And thank you for all the hard work and stuff to make it such a good, safe city. Because that's something we do sell. One quick question for Brandon, maybe? If they do the AVL, is this something that we need to do as a budget item? Or do we need to do something, would this be more of a CIP item? I know how that'll be brought forward to.
I think I can interject on this a
Okay.
little bit. And we have been working with our current vendor to upgrade this technology.
Right.
And AVL is a subcomponent of that. And we know from our analysis that the AVL doesn't work unless we go with the upgrade, the same company. The dollars are there, Richard. The dollars to pay for it are there. The Public Service Commission is going to significantly offset the cost to the city of Lincoln for a CAD and AVL upgrade. So I don't know that it needs to be a CIP.
I was just wondering, is this something that will affect the budget, the CIP, or any of it?
Yeah, well, I think our point is that all of these things are gonna affect the budget, which is why we wanted to have this
Okay.
discussion with you, because these are the kinds of things that we'll be examining and thinking about as we put together the recommendation to bring to you, but wanted you to have an idea of what these topics are that we're gonna be looking at.
That's
Okay.
Does anyone else have questions? I have two. And I'd like to just ditto Richard's comment, because we know public safety and the delivery of public safety is the number one function of what we all do here in the city of Lincoln, and we know it's a huge component of our budget, as it should be. But I have two questions. You talked about the violent crime rate, and particularly the increase in sexual assaults. How does that increase in violent crime compare to, say, the city of Omaha? How do we compare nationally?
Great question. Let me page to something that was sent to all of you, because I think that is important. Take me just a second here to find the right slide.
And then I'll just ask my second question while you're looking for that. You know, I didn't hear you talk a lot about body cams, and we've heard body cams talked a lot in the past, and I don't know where we stand with increasing the number of officers that have body cams, or vehicles that have body cameras, or, you know, the servers, the memory storage that we need to maintain that data.
Sure.
Okay.
So the question, the answer to your first question is contained in a slide that I sent to all of you as part of the presentation, because we want to know, how do we compare in violent crime, right? So Lincoln is below Omaha significantly in the violent crime per 100,000. It is below many of our peer agencies. And so there is a graph that I will resend or get to all of you that breaks that down and shows where Lincoln is. And it's something that we're incredibly proud of, and it comes not at just the work of the Lincoln Police Department, but of citizens' willingness to come forward. The second, body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras began implementation in January of 2019 on the center team. And they continue to be used by our center team officers. In January, this January, they are becoming part of our Northwest team. So this is a strategic incremented implementation of that technology. And we continue to work with our IT staff, with David and his staff on the sustainability of the memory that is required and all of the other infrastructure too, right? Because we have to have wireless access points where this information can be downloaded. And so it'll be part of the Northwest team. We fully believe that we want it to be part of another geographic team in 2021, and every year after. One team at a time. We have 5 times. We have 2 now, plus we've added it to our traffic enforcement division. And what we're looking at currently is, do we have the personnel, the civilian support staff, to support all of the requests from prosecutors to take a look at that particular information? And that's something that we're going to measure throughout 2020. But we're excited about it. In fact, in a recent meeting, there was a senior field training officer that brought forward to me that consideration for where officers bid was, does that team have body-worn cameras? Our officers want them. We believe the public wants them. We think that it increases accountability on our part, and it definitely shows when they do a great job, and if there's something that we need to address, it shows that too.
Right.
Couple of questions. Chief, where do we stand as a discussion about body armor for firefighter paramedics? Is that being considered?
It is. It is a cost that we don't have budgeted.
Okay.
We'd like to have it. We think it's important for our members. But there's a couple of components of that conversation. One of them, as the police department knows, is it personally custom fit for you, or is it a generic general kind of set that multiple people can use? Obviously, the second or the latter is not as costly as the first one. But we're having those conversations, and I believe that it is a piece of equipment we need to have, but it is a budget item that we currently don't have funding for.
Okay. Do you have a ballpark number at this point at all about what
Excuse me.
we're looking at in terms of cost?
I have a figure in my head, but
Well, you can share that privately.
okay.
later. And one other question, and I was hoping what we could get is, what my research shows drives cost in public safety, both for fire and police, is 3 factors that increase over time for communities like ours. One is the increase in land area, another is the increase in population, and another is the increase in the number of special events in a community. Is there any way we could get some kind of handle on how that growth is going, and compare that to the budget, the money we're budgeting for public safety, and compare it to the personnel involved? How do these variables that I know are increasing match up with the resources we're dedicating?
Yep.
That's what I'd like to see.
And I think that's a very good question. And if I could add a trade-off. So if we are increasing in land mass, that means the county side is decreasing in their territorial responsibilities. And so what are the trade-offs that are part of your ongoing discussions on areas that are being annexed?
We've developed a metric which we use to help us determine when we should purchase land for another station and when we should actually build the building. So they're 2 different metrics. Both of them involve percent of development, number of rooftops, performance both in the area and in the other areas, degradation of performance in the other areas. It's a bit of a complicated metric, but we're definitely open to sharing it with you.
Okay. I'd like to see those numbers.
Roy, when you talk about special events, of course, we're seeing the population
Oh,
growth,
yeah.
we're seeing the continued land acquisition that stretches the geography that someone must travel to respond. And then when we talk about the demand for special events, many of those special events, at least from the police department's position, are what we consider off-duty employment, right? Over 4,300 shifts last year that were subsidized by University of Nebraska, Lincoln Public Schools, the Schools Activities Association, the hospitals, the list goes on and on. We are convening a group to study that particular issue because I can assure you there are many more requests than what we fill. It's not as easy as do we have the resources available, which is some of the conversation. It's also, is the Lincoln Police Department the most appropriate agency to be able to staff that? But, game days, we've talked about that a lot, and we need to provide a presence for effective traffic direction and control, and to ensure that there is an ability for us to prevent and to respond if a tragedy occurs. So.
Okay. Good for me.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions? Thank you both very much, we
Welcome.
appreciate that.
On to 3.2.
Yes, and is there a motion to
I
go
move
into-
that we go into executive session to discuss technology security.
Is there a second to that?
dangerous to people. As those ash trees come down, they kind of shatter like glass, so they're messy to deal with. And there's actually been arborists who have been killed by removing ash trees because they're so unpredictable because they're very brittle. So like I say, we're trying to avoid that image on the right. The good news is that we've been working on this for more than a decade at this point. We discontinued planting ash trees many years ago. The Community Forestry Advisory Board recommended adoption of the Emerald Ash Borer Response and Recovery Plan middle of last year, and then the council actually approved it in December. And we started funding the Response and Recovery Plan back in fiscal year 2016, 2017. And a little bit about kind of a quick overview of the plan. Essentially what the plan lays out is phase removal and then replanting. A phase removal of all 14,000 public ash trees, and then planting of replacement trees for those on a one-for-one basis. And the suggestion is that because we're trying to keep the trees alive during that removal period, and so there'll be interim treatment of a portion of the trees to keep them alive during that removal period. And we're also allowing residents to adopt ash trees near their homes so they can voluntarily fund the ongoing treatment of those trees. This is the size distribution. We had the inventory completed in 2017. And at that time, we had just over 14,000 public ash trees along streets, in parks, and on golf courses. About 7,000 of those, it's the red category, are trees that are less than 12 inches in diameter. The middle-sized category, that 13 to 24-inch category, there's about 5,100 trees that size. And then what we consider large diameter trees, those are greater than 25 inches in diameter, and there's about 2,100 of those trees. And this gives you a visual reference of what those look like. That small diameter tree, about 50% of the trees in the system are that size. That medium size, about a third of the trees in the system are that size, and then that large diameter ash tree, about a sixth of the trees in the system are that size, if that gives you some sense. This is the funding as it's been laid out. As I said, we started with Emerald Ash Borer funding in 2016-17 and 17-18, and the goal of those 2 years was to purchase the equipment that was needed to remove the ash trees and then to begin staffing up. And so we've hired arborists and we hired a community outreach forester. And then in 2018, essentially, we were staffed up and we were equipped up to be able to remove 1,000 ash trees a year. And then the funding for the replacement trees and contractual removal of the large trees is in the capital improvement program. And so what's been accomplished to date, I mentioned some of this, the inventory has been completed. We've hired a community outreach forester. As I said, we've purchased the equipment and we've hired the arborists for ash tree removal. We now have an electronic asset management and workflow system for management of public trees. And we do have EAB specifically identified in 3 neighborhoods in Lincoln. In 2018, it was an adult emerald ash borer was found in a trap in far southwest Lincoln. Interestingly, last year, near Randolph Elementary School at 40th and F Street, we found emerald ash borer in the trees. And then near Trago Park at about 22nd and R Street, we also found emerald ash borer in those trees as well. So it's right in the center of Lincoln, to be perfectly honest. What have we accomplished in the last several years? By this time, we had hoped that we would have removed about 2,000 ash trees. So the goal was to remove 500 during the first 2 years, 1,000 a year after that. We're actually just about 1,900 trees. I would tell you that transitioning to the electronic workflow system, there was a little bit of a learning curve, and we think that's part of why we're a little bit behind where we'd hoped to be, but we're pretty close. Primarily, the way that we are replanting at this point is that when we take a tree down, we're offering a voucher in the value of $225 to the adjoining resident, and then they go to a local nursery and they coordinate getting it planted. And part of the strategy of that is that hopefully then they also have some ownership in caring for that tree. So to date, we have planted about 2,100 trees, so we're actually ahead of where we're at, and that really is because We had some great help from Union Bank and Trust. They provided 200 trees that we planted as replacements for, proactively planted as replacement trees for ash trees in parks. And then Rotary 14 coordinated with the other Rotary clubs and planted about another 300 trees. So actually, I think we're in good shape in terms of, we have actually planted more replacement trees than we've taken down at this point. And you've got the brochure. We launched the Emerald Ash Borer, the Adopt an Ash program last April, and so far 183 trees have been adopted. And I'm looking in front of Richard, and I realized that I forgot to talk about that map. That map, I think, is significant. That is, based on our inventory, that is the location of the trees by size, by street segment. So the green street segments on that map are the smaller diameter ash trees, and you can see they're pretty much all over Lincoln. The yellow street segments are the medium-sized trees, and again, they're pretty much all over Lincoln. The red is the larger diameter trees. There are some of those spread around, but a majority of those large diameter trees are in the Meadow Lane neighborhood, in northeast Lincoln, and in the Trentwood neighborhood in southeast Lincoln. So I apologize, I meant to mention that.
Can I keep this?
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody else wants that, we can make more copies of that. So from the ash tree, or the emerald ash borer finds that we had last summer, we were able to sort of track back and estimate how many years the trees had been infested. And we think they've probably been infested based on sort of the life cycle of the damage that we saw to the trees, about 3 or 4 years. What you're seeing here is what they call the emerald ash borer death curve, and what this indicates is that about 5 or 6 years after emerald ash borer is identified in a community, the death rate ramps up very quickly. And what we're trying to do is avoid having lots of standing dead trees as that begins to ramp up. One of the takeaways of this presentation is that we think it is time for us to begin interim treatment, because we've got to make sure that trees are staying alive. And so during the budget process, we'll be bringing forward a proposal of how we start that interim treatment process. The other thing, and this is for kind of everybody at this point, is that the other recommendation is that when emerald ash borer is identified within a 15-mile radius of your home, your community, wherever, the recommendation is to start treating. So if people are planning on preserving ash trees on their private property, they should also be treating right now as well. The thing that we have learned, and we probably could have figured this out in advance, but what we're finding is that in higher renter occupancy neighborhoods, we aren't getting good utilization of the vouchers. Renters don't seem to have as much interest in planting street trees. And so we worked with urban development. This is a map of the areas of the community with renter occupancy greater than 45%. And we're actually going to move to contractual planning in these areas. So we will issue contracts, and we'll oversee the planning in those neighborhoods. And actually, we got some advice from the NeighborWorks event on Saturday morning about working with the neighborhood groups and seeing if we can get, if the neighborhoods know that we are planting contractually those trees, maybe they would be willing to help out with keeping them watered and hopefully pruning as those trees are young. So that's a change we're making.
But that is not only emerald ash borer trees, it's all trees?
It is all trees, to be perfectly honest, because, yeah, we also use vouchers for replanting of other varieties of trees as well. That's our primary method of getting trees planted right now. So looking ahead, we are now removing ash trees in parks. We have about 1,800 ash trees in parks, and we've decided that we want to work on those over about a 10-year period. And so we're removing about 180 ash trees in parks this winter. We've divided that evenly between the quadrants of the city, so each maintenance district is taking down 45 ash trees. So some of those, if you've been out to Pinehurst Park, you've seen some huge ash trees that have been taken down. If you've been to Mahoney Park, that is the park that has the highest ash population, and we've taken down a significant number of those. We are working on developing a volunteer training program, because we know that we are about to plant thousands of trees a year. And those young trees need to be watered, they really need to be pruned. about once every 3 years. We really aren't staffed to be able to do that, so we're hoping that we can work with community groups and volunteers in establishing a volunteer tree watering and hopefully tree pruning program. Ashwood utilization is an ongoing conversation. The good news is we are keeping the wood out of the landfill. The experts tell us that about 80% of the wood is probably going to be best utilized as mulch. But there's 20% of that the trunks and the branches are large enough that they can be cut to dimensional lumber. And so we've been working with the Nebraska Forest Service to try to figure out how do we promote that, because Nebraska really is not a timber industry state, so we've got to figure that piece out. I think I mentioned this way back when we presented the plan. You probably know that the city has an ordinance that requires private property owners to remove hazardous trees from their property. And I think we can envision that we're going to have a lot of, or some number of lower income property owners who have ash trees on their property who may not have treated them, and those trees are becoming hazardous. And then the city is going to be in the position of going and telling that property owner that they have to remove that tree. And that could be thousands of dollars. And so one of the things we've got to get figured out is how are we going to provide some financial assistance to those lower income property owners in helping them to manage their trees. We continue to ask the state for help. Today they have not done that, but we will continue to ask. And then we will continue to do this level of reporting on an annual basis so that you're aware of the status and you're aware of kind of the new challenges that we're facing as we move through this process. And we're down to questions at this point.
Questions? Any?
High-level question. 15-year lifespan after we notice it, that most of the trees, you're replacing them, you're taking down about 1,000 trees a year. You're trying to keep most of them healthy and manageable. And you're replacing, those are just ash trees you're taking down. Are those all trees you're taking down, that 1,000 a year?
That's just ash trees. The other varieties of street trees that typically we're taking down between 500 to 700 other types of street trees a year due to either age or decline or damage. And so overall, we're taking down someplace between 1,500 and 1,700 total trees a year.
And that inventory was just public right-of-way trees, the 14,000 something.
That was a combination of street trees and park trees. So there's about, at the time that we did that, there was about 12,000 ash trees along streets and about 1,800, about 2,000 in parks and golf courses.
Any numbers on privately owned or on private?
You know, the Nebraska Forest Service makes a guess, and they say that for every public ash tree, there's probably 3 or 4 private ash trees. So there's probably 40 to 50,000 private ash trees out there at this point. Yeah. So, yeah, and that number is concerning from a variety of reasons. That as this really hits law of supply and demand, the cost for removal of ash trees is going to go up. The cost of treatment of ash trees is very likely to go up. The other thing that's happening is that because emerald ash borer has affected so many communities, the cost of purchasing new trees is also going up. For many years, it remained fairly static, or it crept up about the rate of inflation. The trees they're harder to get, and they're more costly than they used to be as well.
How big are the trees you're replacing, the planting?
Our standard is that we are planting it, the diameter size is 1.5 inch diameter, so they're big enough that they can withstand a little bit of abuse. They're small enough that they establish well. Those trees, depending on the variety, are probably 8 to 10 foot tall, so they're big enough they make a little bit of a visual impact, but it's going to be 10, 15 years.
How much are we paying for each one of those?
About $225 a tree is what we're paying. Yeah, that's about the cost to purchase and plant a new tree of that size.
Get on the NRD website and they have really affordable saplings, like the size of this microphone. That's,
Very affordable.
yeah,
But
not gonna get
they're,
the job done, is it?
they're
A
that
lot of them
big.
don't survive.
Yeah.
So, hearing the numbers of private ash trees that may be in Lincoln is kind of disconcerting for so many reasons. But, I mean, I can imagine there are many people who don't know what an ash tree looks like and will be surprised on some morning when they wake after a windy night and realize that they have trees down.
Yeah.
Have an ash tree in their living room.
Yeah. Wow, we used to have a garage. So what kind of, besides, the Adopt an Ash Tree program for street trees and park trees, what are we doing to help the public know what they've got in their own yard? And what's the likelihood that any of that comes back on the city? I can understand the low income. I mean, there's a whole nother issue about, who can afford to do it and who even knows what the trees are. But I look at all of that and go, well, there's a liability issue here. And is any of this a public nuisance? Are we negligent in any way?
It's a good question. Our website for the community forestry program, particularly for this program, is trees.lincoln.ne.gov. So we've been trying to promote that. One of the things that's on that site is anybody can go to their residence and see if the street tree in front of their house is an ash tree. We also are providing, I think it's on there, some images of what ash trees look like, leaves, bark, that kind of thing, so that if people have an interest in trying to figure out, gee, what kind of tree do I have, maybe that helps. If it's not there, it's supposed to be there, and I'll make sure that it is. And obviously, we continue to talk about this, and the Good Journal Star continues to write about this, and
One of the biggest concerns that I have is the low income portion of it. Because even like a $500 car repair bill can set people back months, right? Let alone removing a tree for thousands of dollars. So are there any current programs to help low income folks remove ash trees, or has that not been developed yet?
it's not been developed at this point. We know that it's going to be a challenge, and it's something we need to start some conversations with. And we probably need to reach out to some of the funders in the community. We've had some conversations with urban development about a low interest or a no interest loan program or something, because a lot of these ash trees are going to be in backyards. They're going to be in established neighborhoods where they're hard to get to, and it could be $3,000 to $5,000 to remove an ash tree in that situation. So,
Lynn, could we offer, in addition to that program you're mentioning, maybe like when we do a street improvement program where it becomes part of their property tax bill going forward for a set term to get that tree removed for individuals who find it a challenge?
Like a district, forming a district.
we can
A
talk
tree
about
improvement district, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what you would call it, but.
TID.
A TID.
Tree improvement.
Yeah.
To help those individuals, I don't know if we have teams to go out and identify quadrants of, take an inventory of property owners and give them an advisory and offer them, these are solutions you might want to consider to help with the tree removal. It just seems like it's a tremendous outreach.
And it may be
responsibility.
that helping low-income property owners treat their tree may actually be, in the long term, it's not the cheapest option, but at least for a while, that may be a way, because if we can treat a tree for a few $100s every couple of years, maybe that's a way that we can help sort of spread this out a bit too. I don't know.
And I don't know if any neighborhood associations can apply, for grants, working with this and have maybe their neighborhood looked at first and do a rollout and see if, that's successful in one neighborhood and the word will spread with neighborhood associations that this has been successful, and because we do have some time, but it's not a lot. Yeah,
I'm not
James.
an arborist by any stretch of the imagination, but is it cheaper to cut down trees that are smaller than the ones that are big? Like, so cheaper to cut down like the green line trees rather than the red line trees?
It is, yeah. We did a study a few years ago, and actually we just recently updated it, of what, it's actually cheaper for the city to take down trees that are 18 inches in diameter and smaller than for the private sector. But when we get larger than that, partly because of the equipment that we use a big log loader that we have really for storm removal for storm purposes, but it makes the crew more efficient. At that point, it's actually less expensive for the private sector to do it. The range is, last time we looked at this, a very small diameter tree is probably less than $50 to remove. Large diameter tree is, we just bid removal of 39 large diameter trees, and the cost was $54,000. So
We're talking street trees there.
street trees.
Yeah.
So I guess the part two to my question would be, how fast do these ash trees grow? Like, do we need to worry about the green areas turning into the red areas and becoming more expensive in like 5 years or so, or?
They don't grow, yeah, the good news is they don't grow quite that fast. So
Okay.
they'll typically put on maybe a ½ inch to maybe an inch, but more in the kind of the ½ inch range. So it takes a lot of years for them to move from that smaller category to the medium and then the large category. So it's not gonna happen very quickly. It does gradually happen over time, and the smaller trees will caliper up more quickly than the older trees, the larger trees.
Real quick, the cost to treat a large tree is more than treating a small tree.
Yeah, it's, the method that we recommend is actually a trunk injection
Right.
method, and the number of injection points is determined by the diameter of the tree. And so the average cost that we've been using is about $200 for a medium-sized tree every 2 years. But yeah, it's entirely based on the size of the tree.
But the cost-benefit ratio pays off to treat the larger trees as opposed to the smaller trees.
Yeah, and that's kind of, our thinking right now is we're focusing on treating the middle-sized trees because they have the most life left in them. And they're also big enough that they're providing some of those benefits like shading and stormwater management.
Since we've had emerald ash for a while, does anyone, or ash borer for a while, do any trees survive?
They're finding in some communities, there is a random, either white ash or green ash that survives. And they're doing some research on that to try to figure out, what is it about that tree? Because it's not a disease, it's an insect. So somehow that tree must taste bad or something.
All right.
Any other questions for Lynn?
Thank you for your time.
Thank
this
you.
afternoon.
Thank you,
That's
Lynn.
very important discussion.
So I just wanted to lift up that this is also supposed to be a dialogue. We don't want all of these 2-hour meetings to be us talking at you, and appreciate your questions, and we will have a response and additional information to follow up with you in the coming week, based on what we talked about today. And then I would just lift it up. I know you probably want to go, but if there are other topics or information that you are thinking about in terms of budget priorities related to this theme or future ones, we also want to leave time at the end of each of these to have that dialogue, because we think that part is important too.
So Jennifer, with the schedule real quick, next week?
Tuesday next week?
Next week, we're meeting at noon, and we're talking about Strong and Resilient
noon on
City.
Monday, yeah.
And we will be giving you an update on the progress with the climate action plan that has been in progress. We will have an update on water in terms of our hazard mitigation and planning for a second source. And then we'll be talking about recycling.
And then when will we have Lincoln Transportation and Utility come and talk about services? When are they?
You tell me what programs or topics you wanted to cover, and we'll try to have somebody here. But at this point, obviously, we have water and recycling, which are both LTU topics. But at this point, our plan was to lift up large topics that are going to be impactful on the budget in general, and we were not planning to have department-specific come and talk about their general regular work. We wanted to lift up larger topics that laid the groundwork for what we're considering as we put the budget together.
Okay, so I'm thinking maybe innovative and operationally excellent city about some services that LTU is doing. Would that make sense?
Yeah, so tell me which ones you want us to be
Probably.
prepared to talk about.
Be fair to say StarTran and probably snow removal
Yeah.
or winter weather conditions.
Star Trend, the Performance Audit Committee is doing some Star Trend deep dives,
Yep.
and we will meet tomorrow at 4:30.
That's right.
Timely then.
Or does it go into quality of life or?
Well, we have topics assigned for most of these already in terms of what we had prepared to bring to you. So additional topics in some cases. I had talked to Mike Davis about putting together a memo that would update you on their plans in terms of implementation of the transit development plan and program and the large topics that they're dealing with at StarTran. So we'll be getting you those, and then we can certainly react to questions or any other thing you want to talk about. So.
So, okay, but next week, is strong and resilient cities, and we didn't really touch on health for safe and healthy.
Right, and we'll be following up with a memo related to some of the work that the health department is doing.
Okay. Any other thoughts here? Okay, all right, thank you all very much. We are
Can I
adjourned.
grab my agenda for the next meeting?
Can you guys stay here?
Yes, the ILC will stay here.
And that's Roy, Sandra, and Benny, right?
Yep.